Om Gurubhyo Namaha, and my best wishes to everybody on this occasion of Ashtami. And may Shakti, may Devi bless all of us with protection and with what we're going to need for the days ahead to achieve our objectives. So best wishes to everybody. Also, firstly, just to acknowledge our gurus. It's not possible to have a conversation of this sort without acknowledging the impact that all of our gurus have had, and with Kashmir being the fountainhead where all of our gurus trace their guru tattva too, it's appropriate to just acknowledge as well. And to follow Rakeshji's exposition is a challenge. It was extraordinary, Rakeshji. I sat there and just closed my eyes and bathed in the words and the ideas that you were sharing with us. It should be crystal clear to everybody, the landscape that we are now functioning in. And in translating and explicating many of the parts of the Kashmir Files in the manner that you have done, I think you've connected it both to the past, but also to the present. So, Rakeshji, I salute your wisdom. Firstly, I'll just make one remark in response to Rakeshji's incredible introduction, which was overly generous. I think a person can only accept recognition for their own achievements. I find myself in the Lanka of the 20th century. If there is ever a place where the tattva of Ravan re-established itself after fleeing from Lanka of the past, it must be in the city which is known for streets paved with gold in this present. And so I have been molded and shaped by having to spend 55 years here. And so although I have acquired some understanding of how to engage in the protection of our human rights, it's been as a result of necessity as opposed to any enlightened revelation on my behalf. I'm delighted to speak on this forum, and actually I'm honored to be able to speak on this subject, especially with such an engaged and committed audience. There are many times where we speak and we know that perhaps something that we're wanting to share may resonate with one or two people. But this is a subject which is so important and so pivotal for all of us. And so the chance to share some ideas and to listen to people who are so engaged with this subject is also a great honor, and I'd just like to acknowledge that. So I've been here in the United Kingdom for over 55 years, and those of you who know the UK will know that this is an environment which is steeped in colonial concepts and processes that were designed to preserve a horrifically violent colonial history. And so the pressure, the subliminal pressure, but also the direct pressure in every institution to abandon our Sanatani heritage and to accept by osmosis, just by being here, the story that we were being told is something that we have lived under. It's almost like being 10 fathoms deep in the ocean, but the pressure is a different pressure. The pressure is to conform, to accept, to become what Macaulay described as his ideal Indians. I've been speaking in this country for the last couple of decades against every act of violence which has been directed at our Hindu community. And there have been many, some slight, some very significant, some grave, and very, very serious. So my experience and expertise is actually in violence and its manifestations and disguises. And I've learned that as Sanatanis, as Hindus, we are defined by what we are, but also by what we are not. And if I took anything from the Kashmir Files, something which was so glaringly obvious, was the way in which the story brought into stark reality the truth of who we are and also who we are not. Because this is vitally important. There are many, many cultures who seek to appropriate and shoulder the mantle of who we are purely and solely for their purposes, deceitfully and with violence in their hearts. We already know that this phenomenon, the Kashmir Files, it's broken so many records. It's already breaking into the mainstream. And that was the catalyst. That was the indicators I was looking for. Are we going to be able to see the Kashmir Files break out of the silo of our own community and into the mainstream and start to impact upon their conversation? And it has done that now. I'm seeing commentators here in the United Kingdom who are generally not too concerned or interested in what's happening within the Hindus, as it were. But they are now speaking about this Kashmir Files because it touches and resonates at a level which needs to be empowered in people who are not just of a Sanatani origin, but who are from a much broader background as well. The dam, it's almost as though there was a dam, and that dam was holding back a torrent of civilizational trauma. And what the Kashmir Files has done is taken a sledgehammer to that dam and just completely unleashed that torrent. And in doing so, it's also released what I'm seeing as a civilizational gag. There was a deeply inbuilt self-censoring that we had sort of had to take on board just purely and solely to survive. And what the Kashmir Files has done is it's removed that gag. It's given us the words. It's given us the vocabulary. It's given us the context and the facts with which to say this is what happened. And it happened because of who we were, not for any other reason, but because of who we were. And that who we were is vitally important for us to know. As I mentioned, the area of expertise, if I have one, is probably violence and its manifestations. And the Kashmir Files is a study and a graphic lesson in violence. And I'm going to speak to violence for a few moments. You know, we are a civilization which refined to the ultimate degree the understanding of ahimsa, the absence of violence. And now we are experts. We are understanding violence in all of its forms. And so I'm going to speak on that. You know, I am aware that our gift has been the darshan of ahimsa padmo dharma, which has been misinterpreted and misprojected for a long period of time. But it's a statement that non-violence is the highest state of harmony. You know, if there is a tattva of dharma, something which is so essential without which it wouldn't be dharma, it has to be harmony. And the British word harmony is a tiny little word, but when you expand what it really means, it's everything functioning with an objective, smoothly supporting each other, nourishing and receiving nourishment and giving nourishment, harmony, an existence, a universe in harmony. And that is the tattva of dharma. And we said ahimsa is the highest state of dharma. Without non-violence, there cannot be harmony. There cannot be dharma. And the essence of it is something that was enshrined, I feel, in the Kashmir Valley. You know, life, our vision was that life is beautiful, it's free, you know, divinity flows through us like the Ganga. And, you know, humans blossom into the best of what Devi Lakshmi's children were supposed to be. But hatred of life flows and brings darkness. And I'm really clear that the intention of those hateful clerics was to destroy life and beauty. It was to extinguish laughter, to extinguish light, and then to erase the memory of a valley from which the Ganga of our Brahm Vidya has flowed. They wanted to enslave the fountainhead of Gyan, of Kala and of Dharma Vidya. They were crystal clear in what their mission was. This was not an accident. You know, we know that they burned books and people with equal heartlessness. And it has to be acknowledged that it was clerics who laid the seed of that hatred, which justified the sacrilegious violence which then flowed into that valley. The moment sounds were uttered from speakers in religious institutions, it became religious. The moment identities were declared as being the reason for desecration, for violence, and for the inflicting and establishment of terror, it became religious. There is no escaping these facts anymore. And the Kashmir Files have given us a platform to be able to say these things and to be able to articulate them. Usually we shy away from entering to the space because all religions are the same. And it's very difficult to even say that. It's a complete statement of asatya if ever there was one, but we've not been able to say it, and now we can say it. And we can reference the book, we can reference the film, we can reference the evidence and declare it to be the truth. You know, the Kashmir Files enables us to hold a mirror up to people and institutions and ideologies and say, this is who you are. Convince us that we're wrong. We're willing to listen. We want to engage. But this is who we see. Please engage with this issue. You know, there's another lesson that the Kashmir Files really made clear to me. And it's the living lesson of the Gita. It's embodied in the sacrifice of our Kashmiri Pandits community. You know, they refuse to become demonic. This is so important. I'm reminded there was one point in the Mahabharata when Sri Krishnji abandoned the battlefield and was given the name Ranchor because he left the battlefield. But he did so for strategic reasons. And he did so to preserve the capacity to return successful and to be able to complete the battle. The Kashmiri Pandits community, they sacrificed the custody of the land in which they had established Vidya so that they could preserve the essence of that Vidya itself. This is a recognition which I think deserves understanding. If the pinnacle of all Sanatan Vidya is to help a human being climb the ladder from being a barbarian to being divine, to being incarnate with an animal awareness, to becoming divinity incarnate, that Vidya is so vital and important that it's preserved. There is no other Vidya like it. We are unique in the tradition which has this Vidya. No other tradition has been able to say, on the basis of experiential, testable practices and processes, Tattvam Asi. Isn't that something worth preserving? And if the choice is to preserve that and all of the processes whereby other people can experience that and abandon one's land, it's a clear, simple choice to make. And that's the choice that they were required to make in the face of horror. You know, they've carried the essence of Sanatan Dharma in every corner of Bharat and the world. You know, the epitome of what it is to be a vessel of Dharma Vidya, worship of Devi Shraddha, Saraswati, to save the higher values of freedom of thought and speech. This was what their mission, their responsibility, and their objective was. They shouldered this. There's another message that I found in the Kashmir Files. There's a warning. You know, it's a study of violence has revealed to me that violence occurs on 3 levels. It's intellectual, it's emotional, and it's physical. And these old weapons of this violence, they go back to a medieval barbaric age. But Raliv, Galiv, Saliv is that unholy trinity, isn't it? Convert, flee, or die. Convert is intellectual violence of the highest kind. It means abandon the Gita, abandon all of your Dharma Shastra, abandon everything that you know and that you experience from moment to moment, and that's etched into the value of your fathers. Abandon it all for something which makes no sense to any person of reasonable, rational thought. It's the highest intellectual violence. And then to use fear, flee, and to establish it with terror, that's emotional violence. You place that into somebody's heart, and it binds that heart. And then obviously, die is the threat of physical violence. Those 3 words became the articulation of violence in every dimension that violence can exist in. The message that I found in the Kashmir Files, articulated in that manner, it made it clear to me that those old weapons of intellectual, emotional, and physical violence are still being leveraged today. They are in every forum. They're in the United Nations, European Parliament, the British Parliament. The fear of criticizing an ideology because of the allegation of Islamophobia is intellectual violence, isn't it? The assertion that there is only one path and all other paths have to be subservient, that's emotional fear, that's emotional violence. So we're seeing two forms of that terrible Ralif Galib Salib apparent and present across the world. There is only the third one, which is yet to be articulated. And as dominoes tumble one by one, I feel the third is not far away. In unveiling these and presenting them for everybody, you know, Vivekji and his team have communicated this message in a manner that can reach not just all of our Sanatani families, but it can reach each and every person who is suffering the loss of those freedoms. You know, just to be crystal clear, since I've mentioned religion and I've stepped into that space, freedom of religion and belief is a mantra which is not true. We have something which is from a higher perspective. This is not the highest ideal. For us, we have an ideal which says freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom from fear are higher ideals than the freedom of religion and belief. The people who tout that freedom of religion and belief as the highest ideals are those who have benefited from the violence enshrined in freedom of religion and belief. You know, to accept as a valid proposition that an ideology which requires you to self-immolate in order for it to be fulfilled is not wisdom. And we are not required to accept that. Hatred has been hiding behind freedom of religion and belief. But I am concerned that it's degraded the human being to such a level that today humanity is standing on the edge of a chasm. You know, and as Sanatanis who have this understanding, we have a double responsibility because we recognize the energies and the dynamic which take a person to that chasm, and also what's required to step back from the chasm. Those who do not know the manner in which we can retreat from this chasm, they have no responsibility because they do not know. We know it. The Kashmir Files makes it clear to us that it's our responsibility to reach out with the message and the vocabulary and the ideology and the concepts that Vivekji has so clearly and graphically laid out for us, to take those and reach out to each and every person we know. They need to know that there are higher freedoms. Our Natya Shastra enshrines those highest freedoms. There are stories of how the expression of these is protected by the deities. We need to take that and share that with other people. Either we remain passive in the face of this hatred that is present, or we support and engage with the tattva of what it was enshrined in Kashmir. You know, we abandon blind belief in death and we choose wisdom and life with courage. So please remember that Galib Ralif Salib is not far away. 2 of the 3 are being leveraged on a daily basis in every forum. Just this thought about highest ideals, religion, the preaching of freedom of religion and belief. We don't have to look very far. There are examples in all of the civilizations, whether it's Galileo, Hypatia, Bruno, Copernicus, you know, there are many who were Sanatani, who were following the ethos that was preserved in Kashmir, pursuing the divine gifts of reasoning as well as seeking, and yet freedom of religion and belief denied that to them. So it will be recognized. There are examples in every culture. Bruno was burned, our scholars were beheaded and thrown into Batmazar. There are people who understand what that means. And so freedom from fear is something that we need to start to talk about, that freedom from fear is more important than freedom of religion and belief. One of the other things that struck me after I'd watched and reflected on the Kashmir Files was that there are lots and lots of words which really serve to confuse some core and simple issues. And one is that wisdom cannot flourish amongst the enslaved. And if you want to enslave a population, you have to deny them wisdom. You have to find a way in which either they handcuff themselves intellectually and emotionally, so they cannot pursue wisdom, and then you can enslave them. And as a culture which has been on the receiving end of the desire and the addiction to slavery from the Christianist civilization and the Islamist civilization, it's worth recognizing that we have been enslaved for a long period of time. And to a large degree, in many countries, we are still enslaved. You know, I look at Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel and some of the luminaries who are leading the drive for technological advancement in Silicon Valley. And often I think, I'm sorry, we are still enslaved. Who is it they are serving? What is the civilizational ethos that is being fueled by our contribution? It's a form of violence, and it's worth us recognizing that. One thing that I also realized when I had conversations about this with our non-Hindu community was that we need to contemporize our message to them. It would not be unreasonable to say that imagine if tomorrow barbarians wielding AK-47s and carrying hand grenades marched into the head offices of the leading tech companies in Silicon Valley and said, abandon everything that you need. This book is all you need. I'm not interested in all of your data, all of your server farms, right? What you need is in this book, and what isn't in this book, you don't need. Let's burn it all. That's an analogy which withstands scrutiny. The essence of what happened can be enshrined in that and communicated in that. So please recognize that we're witnessing the globalization of the power of toxic minorities. They are a minority. They are toxic minorities. The Nazis started off as a toxic minority, and yet they were able to leverage exactly the same, and look what they grew into. We're witnessing the globalization of the power of these toxic minorities. And it's because, as barbarians, they are addicted to slavery. Colonizers were addicted to slavery, and they still are. We can have another conversation one other day about the manner in which even the democracies of this world at the moment, they're still addicted to slavery. They just have a much more skillful, performative democracy in front of them. But there's a last element in here for anybody who still thinks they have a choice. The teaching of the Mahabharata is really clear. Even when the Pandavas sent Sri Krishnaji and said, just give us 5 villages, a tiny corner somewhere, right? Duryodhan said no. Not because they've posed any threat to him economically, but the very existence of even one of those brothers carrying Dharam Vidya would be a threat to the ideology which allowed Duryodhan to thrive, exist, and convince himself of his own self-worth. We are at that 5 villages stage. You know, in Bharat, I see this, that there may be 5 or 6 states, but unless we recognize that even those represent a threat, we have a future which is not going to be too far from what happened in Kashmir on a national scale. So we have no choice but to engage. The worrying thing is that when there are only barbarians left, when they've extinguished the light that inheritors and preservers of wisdom traditions carried, barbarians by their nature destroy themselves. You know, a bonfire of the barbarities, if you will. Don't mind me playing with that metaphor. They will destroy themselves because that's the nature of barbarians. And so we have another responsibility from a dharmic perspective, from the perspective of a genuine Vishwaguru. We are entrusted with the responsibility of preventing even that catastrophe. So I'm hoping I've convinced everybody that we have to act. We have to take the baton that Vivekji and the Kashmir Files have given to us. We have to recognize the power that's been given. But then Ichha Shakti has to be ignited. Right? We have to have the will to do something. Gyan Shakti has been given, Ichha Shakti has to be ignited. And I'm hoping by saying that you've got no choice, we can ignite that and make it flame a little more. And only then does Kriya Shakti appear. This is the process. We are well into the second stage of that process. So if I can turn to something practical, because I'm a practical sort of a guy. Vivekji has given us language and vocabulary. And it's brought us to the stage where we can stand on a platform, show a mirror, and hold people accountable. But in order to move forward, we need more words, we need more vocabulary, we need the language to translate all of this into policy. And so what I want to share is something that I encountered a while ago, which I'm trying to make our community here understand. In 2007, the United Nations passed a declaration. It's called the Rights of Indigenous People. And it's a wonderful declaration. 177 nations signed up to it. And in essence, it places an obligation on member states to protect indigenous people and all of their civilizational assets. In Bharat, we have a colonialist administration still. There's work to be done because Bharatiyas, the indigenous people of Bharat, still live under conditions of what is frankly religious apartheid. Equality is not present, there is discrimination. But the United Nations Declaration gives us the language whereby we can not only protect the Kashmiri Pandits and their right to return in safety and tranquility to that place, but it actually protects the rights of all of the indigenous traditions of Bharat. And the language is there, it's spelt out clause by clause and beautifully framed and very skillfully sculpted concepts, ideas, words, and thoughts. So please, everybody, refer to that and see whether there's something in there that you can use locally. I heard in closing, I'd make one last remark. I heard somebody say, well, why don't we just resettle the Kashmiri Pandits in such and such a place, or in another state, etc. And I can understand from the point of view of somebody who doesn't know what the Tattva of Kashmir was, that might make some sort of comfortable sense to them. But I'd like to emphasize that there was something else about Kashmir which was so important. Those of us who sit and practice sitting in dhyan, we know that we're taught that every day, like clockwork, we must sit in the same place. Because Akash is what influences us and we influence it. That tattva is present. If you sit in the cave where Brahmrishi Vishisht did his tapasya and his sadhana, you go and sit somewhere where other rishis, where Raman Maharshi ji did his sadhana, then you can go deeper than you ever have done before. If you go and sit in a center where people have done practice, it influences you. And in Kashmir, the Akash Tattva itself is imprinted with the sadhana, the adhyatmic efforts of every single rishi who went to practice in that place. It's unique in what it is at an adhyatmic level. And there is an absolute necessity for Bharat to reassert itself, to reclaim, to purify, to cleanse that Akash Tattva of the violence that was imposed upon it. And so the obligation has to be to restore not just the people, but the place itself to what it was, so the rest of Bharat itself can also be nourished and rejuvenated from that source. In conclusion, freedom of thought and speech are higher than freedom of religion and belief, and the highest is freedom from fear. One of the gifts that the Hindu community have given, nobody is frightened by a Hindu. And that is a gift, because if fear is absent, you can have freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And this is part of the legacy and the heritage that we have shared, immensely valuable. So in conclusion, I'd just like to invoke the mantra from the Rigveda, Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Nityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shantihi, 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 Om. And may Dharma return to the valley with all haste. Thank you very much for the time to speak. Jai Shri Ram.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.